In the past few years, sandbox games have really boomed in popularity. Untitled Goose Game, Subnautica, hell, even Nintendo have thrown their hat into the ring with Breath of the Wild. But don't be fooled into thinking this is something new at all. The sandbox genre goes back to 1984 with the game Elite, and some of today's most beloved and recognisable games are sandboxes. Things like Skyrim, GTA 5, Terraria, and what I personally believe to be the kings of sandboxes, Minecraft and Garry's Mod. Now, I've seen some discussions and debates about whether a certain game actually fits into the sandbox genre, so as a bit of a baseline, a sandbox game can be compared to an actual sandbox. You have no restrictive rules within your sandbox, nobody's telling you what to do with your sand, no, you can't build a plane out of it and fly around because you're bound by the laws of physics, much like how you're bound by the limitations of the games. Sandboxes are really unique in that, out of every single genre, they give you the most freedom to do whatever the hell you want to do. You want to fistfight some zombies? Go for it. You want to ride around on a giant snake? You got it. You want to do a high-speed car chase? Who doesn't? And while you might be able to do this sort of stuff in other genres, sandboxes give you the choice to do them, or to not do them, or to start doing them and then find out you actually want to do something completely different and just being able to do that. Games often fall under two different gameplay categories, emergent gameplay and progression gameplay. Emergent gameplay is simply when the gameplay changes and evolves along with the player's actions, whereas progression gameplay is where there's a sequence of things that are set to happen, and they cannot be changed. For example, Celeste has a set number of screens and chapters to go through, to get to the same checkpoints and to the same ending. Sandbox games fall under the emergent gameplay category, as there isn't just one set path. In fact, in sandboxes, often there aren't really any set paths. Look at Minecraft. You spawn into a world and there are 0 objectives. The general understanding is that you're meant to survive, build a house, go mining for diamonds, and so on, but there actually isn't anything telling you to do that. If you really wanted, you could wait 10 minutes and spend the entire night fighting skeletons and zombies. Or maybe you find it fun getting blown up by creepers. Or maybe you just want to play the game as a nature lover and live inside of a tree. It's really up to you. The main problem for sandbox games are these imposing rules and objectives telling the player how to play the game, because that goes against everything a sandbox is supposed to be. Having goals and objectives to complete is one thing, but if they're things that need to be done before being able to play the rest of the game, all you're doing is limiting the experience for the players and forcing them to follow the same line of gameplay. The core element of a sandbox game is avoiding this singular line of gameplay. In Don't Starve, the player is thrown into a world left to fend for themselves. Nobody tells you what to do, and if you don't figure it out, then uh-oh, game over, you lose. If you aren't prepared to deal with the horrors of this world, then you die. But that's okay, because you make a new world, figure out what you did wrong, and you progress further. This freedom to fuck up and explore and do anything you want is the base of the cake. It's fundamentally what makes a sandbox game different to, say, a MOBA or a visual novel. But the icing on this cake are the tools that you give to the player. In the modern age of gaming, there has been a growing understanding between developers and players that to charge a certain price for a game, the game needs to be worth it in terms of quality and of content. In a sandbox, one of the best ways to increase the amount of content is to give the player more tools to mess around with. Look at Gmod. The absolutely disgusting number of tools and objects you have just in the base game without any add-ons is genuinely enough to keep you busy for hundreds if not thousands of hours. Look at some of the stuff you can make. A rideable giant snake, a roller coaster, a firework display, a giant error sign, wait, cut that. And even if you don't want to use any of these, then that's completely fine too. The game also gives you a bunch of guns to use if that's more your style, but the point is that you have options. During its early days, one of the things that Minecraft was lacking was the different variety of blocks and materials to mine and build with. Then not long after, new things kept getting added until the game really did have very little limiting you. As the trailer said, the only limit is your imagination. And we got to a point in 2011 where someone made a working computer. As the game has progressed, more and more items and blocks have been added, giving the player a ridiculous amount of freedom with what they can build. If you can think it, then it's probably possible to build, and likely already exists on some 14-year-old's laptop. Another game which I can't really forget to mention when talking about the amount of content is Terraria. A 2D sandbox game that shares some similarities with Minecraft. Mobs spawn at night, you can make, find or buy weapons, but what really sets this game apart are the bosses. From giant slime to the wall of flesh to Mr. Bones over here, there is a ridiculous amount of boss fights to prepare for in this game. I think there are over 30 bosses altogether. This is one of the best things to do for a sandbox game. Giving the player more content and tools to work with doesn't just play into what a sandbox is supposed to do, but it adds more and more value for the player who is buying the game. So we've got the base of our cake, we've got our icing, it's looking pretty good, but what about the sprinkles? What about the cherry on top? Skyrim is one of those games that still has an active player base with people talking about it over 10 years after its initial release, and who can blame them? The world of Skyrim is pretty damn big, but what really makes it so interesting is the vast amount of lore to this world. This really isn't something that's required to make a good sandbox. Again, Gmod and Minecraft aren't the most lore-focused games out there, but it just adds to the experience. In big open world sandbox style games, the world really benefits from having NPCs to speak to, different areas to explore, and importantly, lots and lots of quests. This is what Skyrim does best. The world is filled with different quests to go on, without forcing you to do them in a particular order. The world is your oyster, yet you always have something to go back to if you need. The world of GTA 5 is also huge, and for the purpose of this video, we'll talk about the multiplayer online sandbox option, rather than the story mode for obvious reasons. In GTA 5, you don't really have anything in particular to do, and everything to do all at once. And the map you play on really helps with this, because you can either spend hours messing around on the train, or you can try and do different stunts and trick jumps, or go racing through the city, or try and steal a jet from the military base. When you have these huge worlds that are created with lots of different things to do, it's pretty easy to spend hours just doing whatever your heart desires, without getting this feeling like you've finished the game. So, there we have it, our delicious sandy cake. While doing my own research for this video, I came across a load of different definitions and opinions related to sandbox games, and realistically, there is some grey area over whether some games really deserve to be called sandboxes, but I feel that the games I've featured have a place in the world of sandbox games. Overall, the main thing that a sandbox should include is this freedom for the player to do what they want. Limitations only hurt the experience for this genre, and when you start adding things like new items, building materials, tools, mechanics, world building and quests, you start to create a great quality sandbox game that gamers can just play for hours and hours without thinking, I'm gonna go and load up Minesweeper now because there's nothing left for me to do here. And once you've done that, you know you've probably made a good sandbox game.